We move now to our main event. Our keynote this evening is the speaker is a distinguished academic and expert on the intersection of trade policy, innovation, and sustainable development. Dr. Keith Nurse is the president of the College of Science, Technology, and Applied Arts of Trinidad and Tobago. Pardon me, I was there last week, the first time in 20 years, and I had a blast. It was business, but the trainees know how to have a good time. Awesome. Yes, so I hope you're enjoying life there. He serves as an expert member on the UN Committee for Development Policy and has formerly held roles as senior economist at the OECD Development Center in Paris and as the World Trade Organization chair at the University of the West Indies. Tonight, we are guaranteed to benefit from his expertise as he addresses the critical topic of preparing businesses for the age of artificial intelligence, a discussion on strategies and solutions. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome to the lectern Dr. Keith Nurse to speak to us tonight on preparing businesses for the age of artificial intelligence, a discussion on strategies and solutions. And now you may use your phone to start jotting down your questions because we are going to have some robust discussion. Dr. Nurse?
Okay, great. Good evening. Thank you very much for that rousing introduction. And I feel no pressure. I expect that I should be able to manage. I'm just trying to see if I could get my computer to actually cooperate. But it's a real pleasure to be here in Barbados again. I was here not so long ago for CARIFESTA and spoke at that. So I take every opportunity to come to Barbados. So when Lynette called me and said, "Are you available?" I said, "Yes, of course." But those of you who know Lynette know that when Lynette asks for you to come, there's only one answer. Is that not so? No, but Lynette and I go back, way back, and I've always been very, keen to see the work of the Small Business Association, and as we were reminded yesterday, I participated in the 2017 Small Business Week, and at that time I talked about creative destruction. So I'll mention a little bit about it. So I will connect where we are today with where we were in 2017. So all protocols having been observed, yeah, I think that's a good position. Let me see if I could open up my presentation because it crashed when I gave the digital guy there my presentation on a memory stick. Okay, it's up. Perfect. So, as you can see, Lynette gave me a very ambitious title. Whether I'll be able to live up to it or not is another matter. And everybody's talking about AI. And I was almost tempted to say, I don't want to talk about AI. Because AI by itself is not the issue or the problem. In fact, the issue is bigger than that, which is that every so often in the global economy, there is a major transformation. We are currently in the 6th long wave. And mind you, I know this stuff because I wrote my PhD thesis on it 30 years ago, thereabouts, so that really dates me. And back then, the estimates were that these economic cycles would take between 40 and 60 years. They've speeded up. Now they're taking 30 and 25 years, which is that the transformations in the technologies are moving at a more rapid rate. And the literature talks about the technologies not from let's call it a technovision framework, but more from what we call techno-economic paradigms. So one of my favorite scholars is Carlota Perez. She's originally from Venezuela. She's been at Cambridge for quite a long time now, and she wrote a book on techno-economic paradigms and their transformation. And I've contributed to work that, celebrates her work. And she talks about how techno-economic paradigms are not just about the technology. They transform business models, but they also transform lifestyles. And it comes with a significant socio-political and cultural set of implications. So, for example, in the last wave, which we refer to often, as Charles reminded us, with the internet, and the growth of social media, one of the critical transformations that has occurred with that process was the relaxation of privacy. Without the relaxation of privacy, there would be no social media. Because who would want to look at social media if you're not minding other people's business? All right? So do not think about AI as just a technology. If it's one takeaway from this evening's session, it would be that. I would like to submit. The other key thing I want to, I'm giving you the let's call it the key takeaways. So if you need to leave early, you wouldn't be at a disadvantage. So AI reminds me of the printing press. It's in the late 16th, early 17th century, we developed the printing press. Without the printing press, we wouldn't be here today. The printing press was the first mechanism to codify knowledge. AI is taking it a step further. Because prior to that, monks wrote books. And only a very small group of people were able to read books. And so education, as we know it today, is a very, in fact, modern concept. AI is going to take it even further. And so when we talk about technologies, people often get confused by the glitz, when in fact, there are some really important technologies that have transformed humanity in some significant ways. So for example, vaccines have probably saved more lives than any other technology. And one of the key key growth areas for AI is going to be in the area of biotech and medtech. Like if I were to put money on where the great rewards are going to come from AI, it's going to be in medical technologies and health technologies and wellness. So, the last point I want to make before I actually start my presentation is that technological change has these huge implications. And one of the things we know about AI, well, there are two things, key things about AI. One, AI needs a lot of energy. I don't know where we're going to bring all the energy for AI and for the humans. Because the rate at which we are investing in AI is going to compromise access to energy for ordinary persons, because the speed at which we are investing in new energy sources is not going to keep up with the speed at which we are investing in AI. And those who are controlling AI are going to be, they're more powerful than the rest of us in terms of demanding who gets energy and who doesn't. The other key thing related to this is that it is a geopolitical race. And really, in effect, what we are seeing is the growth of two key poles with AI at the core, which is that there's going to be a US-centric pole and a China-centric pole. All the other regions in the world are largely users of these new technologies, particularly AI. And so in 10 to 20 years from now, we'll be having a very different conversation. In fact, we will soon have to choose which pole do you want to be in. You are either going to be in the US pole or you're going to be in the Chinese pole. Because the extent to which the technology investments are being developed are such that Europe, for example, is way behind the curve. And the rest of the world is even further behind. So I will share some of that data. I don't have it by regions. And you can well imagine, even though we talk so much about AI, I asked AI for some critical information for my presentation today. And I must say I was disappointed. So AI doesn't know everything just yet. Thank God. All right, let me proceed. Let's see if this works. Let's see if I can work it. I'm going to try and capture 4 key things. Setting the context for AI, which I'll do very quickly because some of the speakers, and if you're participating in any other events, they have been, in fact, people who know more about AI have spoken before me. I'll talk a little about bridging the digital and AI divide. I'll talk about the Caribbean AI realities a bit, and then talk about 5 key propositions. So, I will try to be quick about this. I know time is against us. I won't go into all the different types of AI and so on. Just to say that, all the predictions are that, AI is going to be expansive. It's going to be contributing significant to global economies and national economies. What we also know is that it's generating significant ethical and legal concerns. And so, when I talked earlier about not just focusing on the technology and understanding how it links to the socio-political and cultural, this is something that we need to be very mindful of. because already the key issues are starting to emerge. So issues relating to copyright and intellectual property and data privacy and so on are going to become even more critical. So in one of my recent discussions on this matter, I said that it also generates a global political economy. So for example, AI is going to go after the most profitable content first. So in many respects, that gives us a little bit of a lead time because our content is less valuable. Also, and this is really important, in the Caribbean and in other parts of the developing world, we are not generating a lot of our own content. And so we are overly reliant on other people's content. And AI is, so if we're going to be using AI on other people's content, then what is it that we are learning? Let me give you an example. On my flight from Trinidad to Barbados, yesterday, the person sitting next to me was preparing a presentation. So I felt really guilty. I pulled out my computer. It was a young woman, looks really smart. I decided, let me pull out my computer and work on my presentation as well. So she looked, obviously she looked over at my screen and she says, oh, you're going to be talking about AI? And I go, yeah, what are you talking about? She goes, I'll be talking about AI. He says, are you going to the same conference as me? I said, which conference are you going to? There's a design and construction conference going on in Barbados today, or in the next couple of days, right? Okay, I didn't know about that. She's doing a presentation on AI and architecture. I was like, oh, I'm impressed. So she says to me, let me show you some slides. So I'm looking at a machine now, and I started asking all of these key questions. So what are you guys using AI for? And she says, we're using it for visualization, using it for design. And she said to me, we are using it to train our young architects so that we close the gap between the seasoned architects and the younger architects. I was like, wow. So she showed me some of the work that they've been doing. And one of the buildings that they've designed, and that was in her presentation, I said, but that building doesn't look like a building that's appropriate for our location, for our climate, and so on. So I said, is this building going to be able to withstand a hurricane, an earthquake, a tsunami? And I went down the list. Does it have, cooling effects for tropical regions, et cetera, et cetera? And she admitted, no, because it's an AI-generated building based on data from places that are not here. What is the moral of the story? The moral of the story is, and this is what I said to her, there is a huge opportunity for us to generate data on these key principles. Package that data and sell it to other tropical regions that have hurricanes, earthquakes, tsunamis, and, well, just hot weather. But that's not what we're doing. Most of our firms are just copy-paste, which several years ago, it's only once I think I've been quoted in Parliament in Trinidad and Tobago. The Minister of Legal Affairs, who was dealing with intellectual property, I'd had meetings with her prior to that, and I said, we are in threat of becoming a nation of downloaders. The biggest element or problem with AI is that we are going to become so subservient to other people's data and information, we wouldn't even be able to recognize our own because we don't generate it, we don't document it, and we are not uploading it. And so this is really critical in the creative sector, which for many of you who know me, this is one of my core areas of research. And we used to say, well, AI can't produce great art. Well, it's starting to win prizes. So we are really moving into a very unusual scenario globally, where we are now faced with what can be defined as a huge digital divide, where some people and some countries produce content and others purely consume it. The intellectual division of labor is going to become even more sharpened unless we do something other than status quo maintenance. So I recently wrote a paper for the UN entitled Digital Industrialization, where I focus not on AI alone, but on big data analytics, robotics, Internet of Things, cloud computing, quantum computing, blockchain, e-commerce, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So by being fixated on AI, we miss the big picture, because AI is not going to be the only disruptive technology. In fact, much of our lives are already being impacted by blockchain, whether we know it or not. The thing about AI is that it's on everybody's device now. But what undergirds that is a whole range of technologies that, for most of us, we would not even know the meaning of it. And this is really important, because I went onto the WTO website today to find the data on digital trade. And as you can see, close to 84% of digital trade comes from high-income economies. Middle-income economies account for close to 15%. So it means that the rest of humanity, 80 to 90% of humanity, has 2%, if so much, of digital trade. And digital trade has now surpassed both goods trade and other services trade. So I hear that people say that, we have great opportunities to participate in this new burgeoning era, but it is not being backed up by investment. I'm an economist. I follow the money. So there's a report done by UNCTAD where it estimates the cost of achieving inclusive digitalization. And they estimate the cost per capita and the percentage of GDP that is required for certain regions in the developing world. So for example, for developing economies generally, the cost per capita is about $1,200 US. For upper middle income economies, $2,000. For least developed countries, $400. For landlocked developed countries, it's close to $600. And for small island developing states, about $1,800 per capita for every person. So if you do the calculation, and I actually pulled out my calculator and I said, okay, what's the population of Barbados? We're talking about $600 million per annum of expenditure. That would be a very substantial share of the GDP of Barbados. Not so, Honorable Madam Minister Lisa Cummings. I'm being very familiar with her because we were colleagues. So please excuse me. So I went to look and see how much is being spent in Barbados on digital transformation. I imagine that this is not the full sum. that is probably more than that. And so the estimates I found for the last budget was $30 million US, and it's to improve citizens' services, education, healthcare, social safety nets, and digital inclusion goals. For my country, Trinidad and Tobago, the estimates are it's 329 million TT dollars, divided by 7, that's about $47 million US, thereabouts. Plus we borrowed 120 million from CAF, which is Latin American Development Bank, and 42 million from the Inter-American Development Bank. I'm more familiar with the Trinidad context, of course, and I can tell you, even with that expenditure, we are not anywhere close to where we need to be. Because I can tell you, I am the president of a college that is engaged in this issue, and when we ask, so where is the money going? We are not seeing any of it. It generates a lot of concern for us who are in the business. So, for me, the key question, or questions, are, will AI further exacerbate the imbalance in digital trade? Will AI accelerate the digital divide? And how can Barbados and the Caribbean utilize AI to leapfrog into the fourth industrial revolution? And for me, these are the key questions. So let's talk about Caribbean readiness. Now, I decided to put some data for Barbados. So exports have fallen in the last few months, first half of 2025. Barbados is not alone. And we are seeing that the tariff impacts in the United States, and from tariff policy and trade policy from the United States, is having an impact all around the world, which is not going to go away, because one of the things that we know that happens when the global economy goes through a rapid process of technological transformation, there tends to be a shift towards protectionism. And with protectionism, what we have is beggar thy neighbor policies. Everyone is trying to export its unemployment to another country, and consequently, you start to see the global economy shrinking. So the United States has just announced that they are putting a hefty fee on H-1B visas. The thing that has actually given them a significant technological advantage is now being removed. I think it's folly, but we will see. So, I want to compliment Barbados though, because when I left Barbados back in 2018 or 19, international reserves were 8 weeks of import coverage. So the fact that you've been able to reduce your debt, and in fact, at that time, Barbados was the third highest indebted country in the developing world. So you all have done well to increase your reserves, to reduce your debt, and I see you all have some very ambitious targets going forward. So I'm gung-ho on the fact that the Barbados economy is getting stronger and better. And I think MSMEs play a really important role. I didn't realize that there was such a large share of the workforce and such a large share of value added. And so 60% of the workforce and 64% of total value added is nothing to sniff at. So this is a really critical sector for us to be putting greater emphasis on. So when we look at the AI, some of the AI data, a lot of the AI professionals are male. I suppose that's no surprise. And the salaries, in some instances, are low, and in some other locations, it's high. And what we are noticing as well is that the issue of government policies and the digital infrastructure and so on are really critical dimensions for which, in many respects, we are not very well equipped. So it's only a few days ago that I met the people who are engaged on managing so I'm going to skip that, who are managing and organizing the Caribbean Telecommunications Caribbean AI Task Force and Advisory Council. In fact, I got this information 1 hour before I came here. And so the Caribbean is getting ready. In fact, the person who sent me this, Dr. Ramlal, is currently in New York at the UN General Assembly because he's on one of the UN think tanks dealing with AI. So he's also leading the task force for the Caribbean as well. And of course, they have some really lofty goals to create a comprehensive assessment of AI in the Caribbean, to come up with some key set of policies and so on, and to provide guidelines for next steps and planning and so forth, and collaboration, etc. What I am a little bit more worried about is that we need strategy. Policy by itself will not transform our economies. We actually need to have some clear strategies. So if you look at where the Caribbean is relative to other parts of the world, in terms of digital industrialization, I would say that we are in the status quo framework, whereby we have weak and incremental adoption of AI, ad hoc and slow implementation of digitalization or digital transformation, and limited and piecemeal transformation of key stakeholders. So whether you're talking about the small business area, or, and this is really important, the biggest area for digital transformation in the Caribbean is in the public sector. Public sector innovation is the most necessary component of this process, because without it, the others will fail, the other sectors. Why do I say this? Because in the Caribbean, the public sector accounts for upwards of 25% of the GDP in most Caribbean islands, even as much as 50%. It means that we have government-driven economies. Most of our private sector, we were talking about that just yesterday, even our large private sector firms depend very much on the government as their key customer. All right? And so we need to move from the status quo position to an innovation position, which is not easy to do because you're talking about economic diversification. And often, those same large businesses in our economies that are not engaged in exporting, so I'm making a distinction, tend to be the most resistant to economic diversification. Why? Because it more than likely means that you are competing with their existing business model. So we import a lot from the United States and North America, and we were talking about that today. Can we diversify to other sources where the prices are, in some instances, cheaper? Well, there's a political economy to that. So vested interests will probably challenge those kinds of innovations. So if we are not careful, we'll end up in reversal. And so it's a very delicate balance. One of the strengths of Barbados, compared to other countries in the region, is the capacity of the government to institute change. And I say that having lived in Barbados, I've lived and worked in Trinidad for a long time, but also St. Lucia, Jamaica, and so on. And I can tell you that Barbados has an advantage in that arena. So you need to seize it. So the literature is very clear about the strategies for SMEs. All right, you need to build digital skills, everything from cybersecurity to marketing, digital marketing, You need to generate and encourage more critical thinking, which our education system is very weak at doing. In fact, it actually punishes our young people for critical thinking. And we need to be focusing more on iterative processes and focusing on consumer demand and so on. I can share with you that at the college where I'm the president, we have to deal with these very same issues. And so I tasked my IT folks. In fact, we were one of the first tertiary institutions to create a position. We have a VP for digital transformation. And so I said to them, we have all of this technology, yet our systems are less than desirable. Why is that the case? And their response was very interesting. They said, can we go ahead? I said, what do you mean? They said, well, our staff are very resistant to utilizing the new technologies. And I said, is it up to them? I said, proceed. Next thing I know, we have all these chatbots running around the college, transforming a lot of our key processes. We have something at COSTAATT called AI Connect, which I didn't even understand. Anyway, a few months later, we applied to the Inter-American Development Bank Praise Awards, which is the President's Awards for the public sector. We went into the innovation category, and we beat UWI, UTT, which is University of Trinidad and Tobago, Kariri in innovation, and we won the prize. And I'm saying to you that it actually required very little effort on my part, except to say, proceed. And for my excellent IT staff to do what they know to do best. It had nothing to do with the technology, or in my case, decision-making. It had to do, the big challenge was in terms of getting past the inertia of our staff. So we are applying again to win the award. Let's hope we can win it. And it's very simple, right? We are able to utilize the technology to answer most of our students' queries. Because if you're an academic institution, a lot of time is spent communicating with the students. We have cut that by 85%. And the chatbots and the AI keeps learning all the problems that are being raised and the answers that are being delivered, and it keeps learning. And so AI is a very powerful tool. But if we are only using it purely for internal purposes and not using it to to generate tradables, then that is where the challenge is. And so for the Caribbean, we need to be thinking of how can we use AI to expand our capacity to win new markets in whatever. So for example, when I look at Barbados, one of the areas that for me is very striking, for which Barbados has already begun to generate some benefit, is things like medical tourism. How can you utilize AI to supplement medical tourism or educational tourism? So it's how do you diversify within tourism so that you are utilizing some of your key natural assets and supplementing it with the technologies. So I just came from visiting my chiropractor, who I haven't been to for 4 years. He says I still have the same problem, still imbalanced. But those are the jobs that are not going to go away. AI can't manipulate my body. So we need to be investing more in skills that would really make a difference. And in a small economy, it is possible to do this. So I want to try and draw my discussions to a closure. Earlier this year, I was in Paris at the OECD, and I'm often there. I used to work there. I've been working with them on what we call production transformation policy reviews for the last 10 years. I did the one for Dominican Republic. I led that team. We just did it just before COVID. And in my last visit to the OECD, we had some presentations from countries that are members of the OECD Development Center. So it's the developing countries who are the members. And we had a presentation by the Thai government and also by Saudi Arabia. But the Thai government was particularly interesting. Last month, it was announced that they are introducing this new digital strategy. And they talk about 4 key pillars: data infrastructure, data governance, data utilization, and a digital workforce. I want to talk about the latter because it's close to my heart. I'm an educator. They have developed what they're calling a 4G strategy, which is, let's remember it correctly, the first G is groom. They're using their 40 to 50 universities to groom new entrepreneurial talent. They are treating their universities like incubators and accelerators, not places just of education for education's sake. They've shifted the model from viewing higher education purely as social policy to education as critical to economic policy and innovation policy. Those of us who were in the room, well, we nearly fell down because the level of clarity that they had articulated on this, I think, is really important. So they're ensuring that they're generating smart cities, smart grids, you just name it. They are making sure that they're utilizing the technology to generate new possibilities. And they're putting investments so that if you are a young person and you've done well at university, you have a really good idea, they take you to the next level. So it reminds me of the work that my good friend Basil Springer used to do here in Barbados with shepherding. It's no different. You cannot expect the world to come to you with its technologies because you end up paying a high price. You have to generate some internal capacity to compete. And we know that the countries that spend more on research and development are the ones that are progressing the most in the world. The one key indicator is that. And so your investments into human resource development through higher education is an example of this research and development methodology. But it needs to be backed up by investments that propel trade in the end. So I'll talk a bit about some of these. I have, to conclude, 5 key propositions. One, the first one is that AI is only but one component of digital industrialization. So next time Lynette calls me and asks me to come and talk about something, I'm hoping that it would be about digital industrialization. And let me go back a bit. You see this issue of data localization? It's really important. Most developing countries are not talking about data localization. It's only in Brazil and South Africa and South Korea and China and India and so on that they are ensuring that the data that is collected locally stays locally, and that local firms have control of it, and not Google, not Apple, not Amazon. But in the rest of the developing world, the people who have our data are these big firms, and they are utilizing it to understand what we buy, where we go, what we do every day, every second. They have our data. So there's a huge discussion going on about fair data in the global economy, particularly for developing countries. I just wanted to flag that Data localization is something that most developed countries are not talking about. So talking about AI and not talking about data localization is almost like you're not in the game because you don't know the rules of the game. This, of course, is important for SMEs, efficiency and productivity, enhancing creativity, generating accessibility. All of these things are absolutely critical, but it's about generating content. Are you generating new content? Not just in the creative sector, but in every sector. Are you generating intellectual property that you can leverage? Because in the emerging context, AI needs content in a big way. So besides energy, AI needs content. And that content can be leveraged in multiple ways. It could be purely machine-driven. It could be augmented or assisted by AI. Or it could be human-made with a premium. At the core of it is what I call human intelligence. Remember that concept, humans having intelligence? Well, it will become even more important. So our investments in education will be the key defining rubric upon which our competitiveness will evolve. And this is where intellectual property comes in, in a major way. I just wanted to go back. Because the issue of cultural authenticity and AI sovereignty are going to become the real battlegrounds going forward. And the issue of cultural diversity is going to be monumental. So I'm a Trekkie. I love Star Trek. I grew up on Star Trek. So please forgive me for using this analogy. But do you remember the holodeck on Star Trek? Okay. Never once on the holodeck did you see a country or a city other than outside of Europe. They would teleport back to New York or Paris or, I don't know, maybe Tokyo, but never Abu Dhabi or Bridgetown or Rio de Janeiro, because in the future, these places don't exist, because they don't exist virtually. It is our responsibility as people from this part of the world to ensure that our content gets into the AI, is propagated in AI, so that in the future, people could teleport to Barbados, or Port of Spain, or Castries. Yeah? And so, what do we need to do? We need to facilitate digitalization. We need to establish funds for startups. I know Basil would like that idea very much. He's one of the pioneers of it. And you need to create alternative financing mechanisms, which is that our banks, sorry, Wayne, are very risk averse. Sorry, you're from Caribbean Export, sorry, the guy from Republic Bank is over there. Yeah. So our banks are very risk averse, so you could always get a loan to, I don't know, buy an imported car over money to invest in a business. That still is the case all across the region. And then we need to be boosting marketing, branding, and so on. So our own brands, last time I was here, I talked about breadfruit. Barbados has like the best breadfruit dishes in the world. But if you go to the hotels, it's not there. And when I was in St. Lucia, they had the best cassava bread. But if you go to the hotels, it's not there. Trinidad has the best cocoa in the world. You go to our cocoa and dark chocolate. I have some in my hotel room if you want. Oh, sorry, I apologize. But you can't go to a coffee shop and get good cocoa tea. So, in the Caribbean, we are under-investing in our future, all by ourselves. We don't need no colonizers to do this for us anymore. It's on autopilot. Well, in an AI world, this no longer is our best option. It's real straightforward. If you are not in the business of generating content, you are not in the game. And that's where we have arrived. It's a good place to be because it forces us to shake off our colonial legacies and transport ourselves into a future that is more engaging, is more dynamic, and it's more creative. Our young people need us to do this. Otherwise, we won't be on the holodeck in the future. I thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nurse, for that very thoughtful presentation. The floor is now open to questions. Please remain on stage. Yes, Hallam. Please be succinct. We want to make sure that we, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Dr. Nurse, very riveting and absorbing, extremely brilliant presentation. I must say that is very good indeed. You mentioned a word that nobody cares to mention in the Caribbean, that is blockchain. It's a bad word, right? But Dr. Nurse, in my hand, I have a bank. A bank in my hand. It's a little black box. A bank in my hand, Dr. Nurse, and I can store a few dollars, or I can store your millions of dollars on that bank. And you know where that bank is, right? It's in the blockchain. I want to ask you, though, about something that you don't hear any discussion about. Something called DeFi, D-E-F-A-I. It's decentralized finance and AI. It's the marriage of decentralized finance, which few people understand, and AI, which you understand really perfectly. And I'm told that DeFi has the potential to supercharge businesses in the world. I'd be grateful if you could share a few comments on your thoughts on DeFi. Thank you, sir.
I'm not as versed on it as you are, but I would say that after the areas of health, or maybe even preceding it, fintech-related industries are going to just grow by leaps and bounds. So if you look at some of the African countries, they have done really well with M-Pesa in Kenya and so on to move forward faster. Why? Because their banking sector was very weak and they had a very large unbanked population. In some instances, as much as 80% of their population was unbanked. We have the opposite scenario. 80% of our population is probably banked. And so our banks have a strong purchase on the domestic market, and our central banks have been extremely conservative when it comes to fintech. All right, so the government of Trinidad and Tobago has just passed new legislation that is going to be challenging for those firms going into fintech in Trinidad and Tobago for the next 2 to 3 years. 2 to 3 years is a long time in this current global scenario. Yes, we need to be somewhat cautious about the growth of cybersecurity for all kinds of reasons, security and otherwise. But fintech is with us. So let me give you a quick example. I was in Central Asia late last year, and Kazakhstan went from having a very large unbanked population to be fully online banking for almost 100% of the population in the space of 2 to 3 years. And I met one of the people who was involved in that process, and she is from the Bahamas. And she said to me that she would wish that she could generate the same kind of results in the Caribbean. Yeah. So it is not for lack of skills. We have the people with the skills.
So what is stopping us?
A very conservative banking infrastructure that does very well. Yeah? They earn a lot of money. The Caribbean is actually very liquid. You know, the level of let's call it financial wealth that is untapped is quite significant. But we could. That's another another lecture.
Please, if you have any more questions, please come to the microphone and pose them succinctly. Thank you, sir. We can't hear you, no. No, we're recording, so we need you to come to the microphone. Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Okay. I've written it down for ease of communication. You mentioned the US and China as AI poles, but within these poles are poles within poles. So, for example, platforms like Grok, Gemini, and ChatGPT are already shaping what's seen as fact or fiction, often reflecting hidden interests. Do you believe these platforms are becoming influential power centers in their own right, capable of steering business, government, and society globally, and that may be for good or for bad? Thank you.
Yeah. Platforms will come and platforms will go. Remember Napster? You're young enough to remember Napster? Yeah? Grok and the list, yeah. The platforms will come and go. Look at TikTok and the debate that's happening right now. It's about the data. And so who controls the data controls the global economy going forward. And so who owns the platforms? Is it going to be China? Or is it going to be the United States? Trump is asking the question. Yeah? And before him, Biden. So irrespective of political party, the issue of TikTok's large bank of data is questionable. So it's going to be very interesting to see how TikTok evolves, but TikTok is just another platform. Ultimately, as I said, it's all about the data. Who owns that data is going to be controlling the global economy. So data monetization is the means by which all these platforms are able to earn income. But it's also the means by which they have a critical understanding of all our likes and dislikes, all our posts, who we're communicating with, all of our movements, and so on. So one of the UN institutions I'm involved in, we are using some of these same platforms to track emergencies in least developed countries. Because once an emergency happens, you see a spike in the use of the data or a significant drop in the use of the data. So in real time, we could tell whether there is an emergency in a country that has, for all intents and purposes, very weak infrastructure, but the data itself gives that signal. So I understand your question, but I think that we need to be thinking a little bit beyond that, if I may.
Yes, sir. We're going to take your question, and then you, sir.
Hi, Dr. Nurse. Very interesting lecture. Really enjoyed it. And you certainly challenge us to become creators of our content, capture our own data. But of course, that is going to require a government strategy on how we do that. And I'm not sure I heard exactly how you are suggesting that our governments in the Caribbean go about doing this. There is the rise, of course, AI is about the large language models, but there's also the local language models that needs to be employed and needs to be put in place. And I just wonder what would be your recommendations to Caribbean governments, Caribbean communities, in how we go about capturing our data and building that content creation.
Okay. On my way here from Trinidad, to get to the airport, I have to battle through so much traffic. There's tons of traffic here in Barbados too. Everybody says that to me. It's as though we learned nothing from COVID. COVID came, and it went. And we went back to doing exactly what we used to do before, which was so unproductive. The productivity losses we've calculated in Trinidad and Tobago, the productivity losses from traffic are somewhere between 3 and 5% of GDP. So I know it's nice to talk about how AI is going to transform our economies and so on. If we just deal with the traffic, we could put 3 to 5% back into the GDP. But can we use AI to facilitate this? And the answer is yes. There are countries and cities all around the world using the new technologies to reduce the losses, right? And that's a conservative estimate, because I can tell you, at my college, if we organize a meeting in Port of Spain, we do that as a last resort, because the quantum of time it would take all of our senior executives to get to Port of Spain means that they are tired when they get there. They're not focused on the work that we have to do, and so on. So we have a campus in Chagonas, and that's where we host our meetings and board meetings and so on, not in Port of Spain. All right? So for me, this is like low-hanging fruit that for some strange reason we don't want to address. All across the region, traffic is killing us. My wife does work on the health effects of this, the diseases that are associated with our existing lifestyle in terms of driving in traffic is then compounded into our health systems, which we are also spending somewhere between 5 and 6% of GDP on chronic, non-communicable diseases.
Non-communicable diseases.
Diseases, yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Right, so if you look at how our economies are structured, they are structured around investments that are not creating wealth. And they're not creating exports. So we are increasingly having unhealthy populations, and we're importing a lot of food from places where that is going to be becoming increasingly more expensive to import from. And the quality of the food is also compromised by lots of chemicals and other kinds of things. So what I'm saying is that, and when I was at CARIFESTA, I was asked this what can our governments do? Well, when the British were here, and they were faced with the problems of between World War I and World War II of the depression in the global economy, they required in Barbados that almost every household plant breadfruit trees. I don't know if I can be corrected on this. I stand to be corrected. So the British had a strategy to deal with the economic downturn. Do we have a strategy to deal with the economic downturn? except to hope for the best and to continue doing what we are currently doing, right? So, yeah, I hold no favor for the British. Well, I was born there, and I have one of their passports. But the point is, there's a clear strategy for countries like our own, which is that we do need to reduce our food import bill. If you look at the list of countries in the world, the top 20 food importing countries per capita in the world, more than half of it is countries from the Caribbean. And we are tropical regions that can produce food.
Thank you. Yes, go right ahead.
And then I'll take your questions. Good evening to everyone. I want to thank the SBA for organizing such an event. And to Jordan Hart, I hope he's in the room, for insisting that I turn up here tonight. I think that this was very intelligently and educationally placed and positioned. And we are behind the times. And you have confirmed a lot of my thinking. I also agree a bit about the breadfruit, but I'm a bit worried about the root systems. And I want to say, in Barbados, breadfruit is organic. I've never seen anybody putting anything to breadfruit. So enjoy the breadfruit when you can. But I also am concerned about intellectual property. Now, we've heard that we can go to attorneys and we can do this and do that. But when we send our creative projects forth, too many times we either see them in the newspaper under somebody else's name, or we just can't find the name because they've been sent through an advertising agency. And they are your project, your hard work, and it hurts significantly. How do you think we can go about protecting our intellectual property? Yes, I understand we can do it legally. We can't fight some of these agencies as small business owners. We can't fight governments. We can't fight people in high places who are ready and willing to take your intellectual property. So as we talk about creativity, how do we protect it?
Thank you.
And before, quickly, I just want to say to the SBA, I hope when you plan this seminar that you invited BCC and persons from the SJPP, or whatever it's called now. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Okay.
Well, we have an expert here, Dr. Erica Smith, who I've worked a lot with. She's better able to answer your question than I am. What I wanted to get across in this presentation is the importance of IP going forward, which is that outside of energy, the thing that AI needs the most of is content. And right now, to a large extent, they're using our content and people's content for free. That is going to change going forward. And those who are able to have control over their intellectual property in the age of AI are going to be able to earn significant sums going forward. And so it is now incumbent on every country and every society to secure its intellectual property. Whether you're talking about traditional knowledge, whether you're talking about patents and trademarks, whether you're talking about copyright, geographical indications, the list goes on and on, trade secrets, etc. Creating an audit of all the intellectual property assets that you have, and creating a registry, and then creating mechanisms to exploit that intellectual property is the real key issue. I hear the concerns, but there's several countries in the world who are really now crafting strategies around their intellectual property. Intellectual property is the fastest rising area of trade in services, or what is called intellectual property receipts, and it will only escalate in the context of AI. So things like goods and services, which I showed earlier, are being surpassed by digital trade. Well, under digital trade, you will see an increasing component. I've been talking to WTO about documenting this, of intellectual property receipts as a separate category, because it's captured under services. So, yeah.
Thank you. We have time for one more question. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, my name is Dr. Bradley Balish. I'm a retired weather prediction scientist. And Dr. Nurse
What kind of scientist?
Weather prediction scientist.
Oh, okay.
And your lecture stimulates a good idea that's worth discussing. Suppose somebody in Barbados has a rare type of cancer and the doctors can't figure out a way to treat it. But somebody up in Toronto, the doctors had a patient with the exact same cancer and they found a treatment that works. How do you get the digital information of that cancer in Toronto to put on an information system where artificial intelligence could read that information and say, this patient might be cured by the same treatment? And the doctors don't have the intellectual capability to read all these different papers and reports, but artificial intelligence could. But then you got to share a lot of private information. So.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. I think that human health is going to be one of the biggest beneficiaries from AI, because there's a caveat. There's a income gap or disparity that's going to be at issue as well. So some people are going to be fully, able to access these technologies and the expertise, and other people are just going to be completely out of the loop. But this is where I think the global economy is shifting to very rapidly. They're able to produce new vaccines, as we saw with COVID, utilizing these very same technologies. That is only going to escalate. So there's a bright future for interventions in health utilizing AI. I would say also the same for weather, right? For estimating things like microclimates and adapting that for agriculture, for instance, is a really huge growth area as well. So I'm very gung-ho on the growth of agribusiness and agri-entrepreneurship for that reason as well. And I think from a strategic standpoint as well, I think, which is what I'm implying with the utilizing, talking about breadfruit, there's going to be in the emerging context, it's very soon emerging context, a greater demand for us to do what we call in economics, import replacement. Because we are we're not utilizing our foreign exchange that we generate in a very efficient way. It's being used up on lots of things which we could replace with and generate jobs at home. And we can be utilizing AI and all the new technologies, blockchain in particular, to manage all those logistics. So, yeah.
Thank you. That's the end of our Q&A. Thank you very much. Give yourself an applause for your interaction with Dr. Nurse.